The moment he handed your picture to the psychic, something shifted in the air. It wasn't just a casual interaction. It was as if an unseen force took over the room, altering the energy in a way that was impossible to ignore. The psychic, who had likely seen thousands of faces before, suddenly froze. Her breathing slowed, and a look of deep concentration washed over her face. She wasn't just glancing at the image, she was absorbing something beyond the physical realm, something hidden beneath the surface. At first, he didn't think much of it. He had approached the psychic with curiosity, maybe even skepticism, not fully believing in the depth of what he was about to experience. But the way her hands trembled ever so slightly as she held the picture told a different story. She wasn't just seeing a person, she was sensing an energy, an imprint, something far more powerful than a simple photograph could ever reveal. Then, in that silence, a shift occurred. The air grew heavier, almost electric, as if an invisible force had entered the space. The psychic's eyes darkened with something indescribable, a mix of awe, concern, and revelation. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before she spoke her first words. They weren't casual remarks or vague guesses. They carried weight, as if she had just uncovered something profound. The reaction on his face changed in an instant. A shiver ran down his spine, not from the cold, but from something much deeper, something primal. His body responded before his mind could catch up, a subconscious signal that whatever was happening wasn't just a coincidence. It was real, it was powerful, and it was meant to be revealed. This wasn't about a random reading or a generic prediction. It was something different, something deeply personal. The psychic didn't need to ask any questions. She simply knew. She could feel the energy that surrounded the person in the picture, the invisible ties that bound the two souls together. It wasn't just an image. It was a doorway into something greater, something divine. And in that moment, he realized that the picture he had so casually presented wasn't just a piece of paper. It held meaning, history, and an unspoken connection that even he had struggled to understand. The psychic's expression shifted again, her lips parting as if she were about to speak some truth that could change everything. What she was about to say would not be a simple prediction about the future. It would be a revelation, an unveiling of something buried beneath the surface. She wasn't just seeing an image, she was feeling the essence of the person in the photograph, the love, the pain, the unresolved emotions. She was tapping into something that was never meant to be spoken. Yet here it was, demanding to be acknowledged. He could feel his heart pounding, a quiet fear creeping in as he realized that he might not be ready for what was coming next. Because deep down, he knew that some truths cannot be ignored. Some connections are not accidental. Some moments in life are orchestrated by forces beyond human understanding. And as the psychic finally spoke, her voice steady but filled with emotion, he braced himself for what was about to be revealed. Because in that instant, he understood this was not just about a reading. It was about something much greater, something that would forever change the way he saw you, himself, and the connection you shared. He didn't expect the psychic's next words to hit him like a wave, but they did. The moment she spoke, something in him shifted. It was as if she had reached into a part of his soul he had long ignored, a place buried beneath logic and reason. Her voice was calm, steady, yet carried a weight he couldn't quite define. "This person is not just someone from your past or present," she said. Her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. "They are tied to you in ways you don't fully understand." A chill ran down his spine, but he didn't know why. He had come here out of curiosity, maybe even as a joke, thinking it would be a simple reading, something vague, something that could apply to anyone. But what she was saying wasn't general, it was specific. It was personal. "You felt it, haven't you?" she continued. "A pull toward them that you can't explain. Moments where you think of them out of nowhere, where their name comes up when you least expect it. You wonder if it's just coincidence, if your mind is playing tricks on you, but it's not. It's something more. His throat felt dry. He had never spoken about this to anyone, not even to himself. Yet here she was, pulling the truth from him without him saying a word. There is an energy surrounding them, she said, gently tapping the edge of the picture. Something unresolved, something that refuses to fade. He shifted in his seat. He had spent months, maybe even years, trying to push those thoughts aside, telling himself it was nothing, that people move on, that the past is just the past. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. The memories would return at the most unexpected times. A song on the radio, a familiar scent in the air, a random dream that felt too real to be meaningless. No matter how hard he tried to bury it, something kept bringing them back. You have unfinished business with this person, the psychic continued, her gaze never wavering. Not in a way that demands closure, but in a way that seeks understanding. There is something between you that was left unspoken, something that needs to be acknowledged before either of you can truly move forward. His chest tightened. He had always believed in logic, in practicality, but this felt like truth, a truth he had been avoiding because facing it would mean admitting that his feelings were never as simple as he wanted them to be. Think about it, she urged. Have you ever truly been able to let them go, or have they always lingered in the back of your mind no matter how much time has passed? He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. The psychic could see it in his face, in his energy, in the way his hands clenched slightly as if holding on to something invisible. This connection is not one-sided, she added, her voice softer now. They feel it too, even if they don't say it, even if they try to deny it, they sense it. They may not understand it, but it's there. His heart pounded harder. He wanted to believe that she was wrong, that these were just empty words, but he knew better. Deep down, he had always known. The psychic sighed, as if carrying the weight of what she had just revealed. The universe doesn't bring certain people into our lives by accident, she said. Sometimes the reason is clear. Other times it takes time to see it. But one thing is certain. You were meant to cross paths with this person for a reason. And ignoring that won't make it disappear. He exhaled slowly, staring at the picture on the table. It was no longer just an image. It was a message, a reminder of something he could no longer pretend wasn't real. And for the first time in a long time, he wondered if it was time to stop running from the truth. He felt the weight of the psychic's words settle deep in his chest, lingering there like an unshakable presence. She hadn't just spoken random phrases meant to comfort or intrigue. She had unlocked something he had long tried to suppress. The air in the room felt heavier now, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. You can feel it, can't you? She asked, studying his face. It's not just a thought, it's a pull. Something that calls to you in the quiet moments when no one else is around. He swallowed hard, staring down at the picture he had brought. He had never said a word about this to anyone, not to his closest friends, not even to himself in the quiet of his own mind. Yet here she was, exposing it all, as if she had walked through the corridors of his heart and seen what he had locked away. You've tried to move on, she continued, her voice steady but filled with certainty. You've told yourself that time would make it easier, that distance would erase what was left. But has it? He knew the answer, even if he didn't say it. It never had. Time had only made it clearer. It had revealed that what he thought was temporary wasn't, that no matter how many distractions he created, how many excuses he told himself, there was something in him that remained unfinished, unanswered. You still dream about them, she said, and his breath hitched slightly. She wasn't wrong. There were nights when he'd wake up, heart pounding, as if he had just lived another life within his dreams. Dreams where their voice was as clear as if they had been sitting right beside him, where he could feel the warmth of their presence, the way their eyes held meaning beyond words. And then he'd wake up, staring at the ceiling, wondering why his mind refused to let go. You think of them at the most random moments, she continued. You hear their favorite song in a cafe and it feels like a sign. You see someone who looks like them in a crowd and your heart skips a beat. Their name appears in unexpected places and for a moment you wonder, is this coincidence or is something greater trying to get your attention? His hands clenched slightly. He had asked himself those very same questions, and every time he had dismissed them, telling himself that it was all just tricks of the mind, that missing someone didn't mean they were meant to be in his life. But what if he was wrong? What if the universe had been whispering all along, and he had been too stubborn to listen? The psychic leaned forward slightly, her eyes unwavering. We are not always ready for certain connections when they first come into our lives, she said. Sometimes people meet at the wrong time. Sometimes they part ways because they aren't yet the versions of themselves that they need to be. But when something is truly meant, when two souls are tied together, it doesn't just fade away, it lingers, it waits, it finds a way back, even when you least expect it. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He had always been a logical person, someone who believed in reason over fate. But how could he explain the feeling that had never left him, the moments of déjà vu, the gut instincts that whispered that this person was more than just a memory? The psychic studied him as if she could see the war waging inside him. If you think about them often, it's not just nostalgia, she said. It's a sign. Your soul recognizes something your mind is still trying to understand. He let out a slow breath. There were so many things he wanted to say, so many emotions tangled inside him, but none of them came out. Instead, he simply sat there, absorbing the truth he had spent so long avoiding. And for the first time in a long time, he wondered if it was time to stop ignoring the signs. The psychic's words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on him as if they carried an undeniable truth. He had expected vague statements, generalizations that could apply to anyone. Instead, she had peeled back the layers of his thoughts, exposing something raw, something he had spent years trying to bury. She didn't just describe the past, she pointed to the invisible threads that still bound him to this person. You feel it, don't you? She asked, her voice calm but firm. That sense of unfinished business, the way their presence lingers in your life even when they're not around. It's not just in your mind, it's real. He exhaled slowly. He had told himself over and over again that it was just nostalgia, that thinking about them was a habit, nothing more, but deep down he knew better. The connection had never truly faded, it had only shifted, existing in the background like a quiet hum, always there even when he wasn't paying attention. Have you ever wondered why they cross your mind at the strangest times? She continued. Why even when you're focused on something else entirely, their name, their face, their voice, suddenly appear in your thoughts? He nodded slightly. He had wondered. It wasn't just the obvious triggers, the old photos, the places they had been, the songs that once held meaning. It was the unexpected moments, a scent in the air that transported him back to a specific night, a random phrase that echoed something they had once said, a feeling deep in his chest that whispered their name even when he hadn't thought about them in days. You see, when two souls are truly connected, time and distance don't break that bond, she explained. You can go years without speaking, you can convince yourself that you've moved on, but if the connection was real, it remains, and the universe will keep reminding you no matter how much you try to ignore it. A chill ran down his spine. She was right. He had done everything to move on. He had buried himself in work, in distractions, in new relationships that never seemed to reach the depth he once knew. He had told himself that love fades, that people outgrow each other, that what once was no longer mattered. But then, why did it still feel like something was missing? Pay attention to the patterns, the psychic said, leaning forward slightly. Have you noticed how they always seem to reappear in some way, just when you think you've let go? His mind raced. There were the dreams, so vivid, so real, as if he had stepped into a different life where they still belonged together. There were the random encounters, mutual friends mentioning their name, stumbling across something they had written. seeing someone in a crowd who looked just like them. And then there were the moments of silence, the ones where he felt a presence even when he was alone. When you share a deep spiritual connection with someone, she continued, you don't always need words to communicate. Sometimes energy speaks louder than anything else. And if they're thinking about you, if they're feeling that same pull, you'll feel it too. His heart pounded. There were nights when he had felt it, an unexplainable weight, a sudden rush of emotion, an overwhelming urge to reach out even when he had no reason to. It was as if something unseen was bridging the distance between them, nudging him, whispering that their story wasn't over yet. Signs don't always come in obvious ways, she said. But they're there. The question is, are you willing to listen? For the first time in a long time, he didn't have an answer. The psychic's revelation continued to echo in his mind like the lingering scent of a perfume that couldn't quite be shaken off. He tried to dismiss it at first, brushing it aside as mere coincidence, but deep down, he knew that what she had said was too precise to be ignored. Every word she had spoken seemed to line up with moments in his life that he had pushed away or tried to rationalize. There was no denying it anymore. He had been living in a state of quiet denial, convincing himself that he had moved on, while in reality, the connection had never truly gone away. Her words made him realize just how deep the bond between them truly ran. It wasn't just a fleeting relationship or a passing phase. It was something deeper, something that defied time and logic. He had always believed that when something ended, it was simply over. He had accepted the natural flow of life, the idea that people come and go and that everything happens for a reason. But the truth was, this wasn't just any relationship. It was something that transcended the ordinary rules of love and loss. It was as if the universe itself had woven their paths together, not to be unraveled by mere time or space. The psychic had spoken of the signs that pointed to this unbreakable connection, and now, as he thought back on his own life, he couldn't help but wonder if he had been overlooking these signs all along. It wasn't just the fleeting thoughts of this person at odd times during his day, but there were deeper layers at play. He remembered the way his heart would inexplicably race whenever he heard their name or saw a photo of them. Even years after their last interaction, it wasn't just nostalgia or longing, it was something more primal, something that made him question everything he thought he knew about his own emotion. The more he reflected, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a one-sided feeling. No, there were moments when he could feel them too, as if their presence was brushing against him in the quietest, most subtle ways. It was in the dreams that left him breathless, in the inexplicable moments when his mind wandered back to them, even without intending to. There were times it was as if their souls were still tethered together, constantly pulling toward each other, no matter how much time or distance had separated them. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it validated something he had always suspected deep down. The connection between them had never truly been severed, but terrifying because it made him question everything he thought he had moved past. He had spent so much time telling himself that it was over, that he was fine, that he was healed, but now, faced with this revelation, he couldn't help but feel that maybe he hadn't healed at all. Maybe he had been ignoring something that was still very much alive, something that had been waiting for him to acknowledge it. What the psychic had told him wasn't just about signs and synchronicities. It was about recognizing the deeper, often hidden truths about oneself. She had urged him to pay attention to those moments when the connection with this person seemed to re-emerge, to the times when the universe itself seemed to be reminding him that this chapter of his life was far from over. But the hardest part wasn't recognizing the signs. It was deciding what to do with them. He had to ask himself, what now? What did he do with the knowledge that this connection was still there? That the energy between them was still palpable, even if they hadn't spoken in years? Did he keep pushing it aside, pretending that it was all in his head? Or did he embrace it, even if it meant facing uncomfortable truths? The psychic had been clear. This wasn't just about waiting around for something to happen. It wasn't about passively letting time unfold its own course. No, this was a call to action, a reminder that the universe was giving him the chance to make a decision. Was he ready to confront the past and see if there was something more to be discovered? Was he willing to open himself up to the possibility that this connection could be more than just a fleeting moment in time? Or was he going to close that door forever, leaving unanswered questions and unfulfilled potential behind? The uncertainty weighed on him, but there was also a sense of clarity in the midst of it all. He knew he couldn't ignore the signs anymore. He knew that in order to truly move forward, he had to acknowledge this connection for what it was. Something real, something powerful, something that could change the course of his life. But how? How did he move from simply recognizing the connection to actually doing something about it? That was the question he couldn't quite answer yet. He knew that taking action wasn't going to be easy. It meant confronting old wounds, dealing with emotions he had buried long ago. But he also knew that ignoring it would only leave him stuck in a cycle of confusion and regret. The psychic had given him the key to understanding his own heart. Now it was up to him to decide whether he would open the door. And as he sat with that thought, he realized that, in the end, the decision was his to make. The signs had been given. The universe had laid the path before him. But the choice to walk down it, to explore the possibilities that lay ahead, would always come down to one thing: his willingness to embrace the unknown. The psychic's words had made him feel as though the weight of the world had been placed upon his shoulders. In that moment, it felt like all of his past emotions, regrets, and hopes had suddenly come flooding back into his heart and mind, as if he had been forced to face a truth he wasn't ready for. The most overwhelming part wasn't just the psychic's revelation. It was how everything she said had resonated with him, as though her words were pulling on a string deep inside him that he had long since tucked away. She had spoken about how the connection between him and this person was much deeper than he had ever realized. She described how there was an undeniable spiritual bond between them, one that couldn't be severed by time, distance, or even life circumstances. At first, he had dismissed her words as nothing more than an interpretation of what she saw in him, but the more he reflected on it, the clearer it became. Every experience, every moment that he thought was just a coincidence, suddenly felt like part of a larger, unspoken pattern. He remembered the times when he could feel their presence, even when they weren't physically there. He recalled those dreams where they would appear in the most vivid, breathtaking ways, their voices calling to him across time and space. There were times when he'd see their name in passing or hear a song that reminded him of them, and it would stop him in his tracks, like a ghost from his past reaching out to him. What struck him most wasn't just how strong the emotional connection still was, but the eerie sensation that this wasn't just a feeling, it was a sign that there was something unfinished, something left unresolved, something meant to be explored. It was as though the universe was presenting him with a choice, one that would determine the course of his future. In his heart, he knew there was more to the connection than he had realized. It wasn't just a fleeting romance or a brief chapter in his life. The bond that had been formed was far stronger, more intricate, and more powerful than he had understood. He could no longer dismiss it as something that was merely in the past. The psychic had spoken of how there were things in life that, once set into motion, could not easily be undone. Their connection was one of those things. It was as if the very fabric of their lives had been intertwined from the moment they met, a cosmic thread that connected them in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. The idea that this connection wasn't just an accident, that it wasn't merely some happenstance or fleeting moment, was something he had to come to terms with. There was something deeply spiritual about their bond, something that transcended what he had always believed about love and relationships. It was as though this person was more than just a lover, more than just someone he had once known. It was as if they had been meant to cross paths for a reason, for a purpose greater than either of them could fully understand. As he pondered this, he found himself asking questions he had never dared to ask before. Why had their paths crossed in the first place? Why had they been drawn together? And most importantly, why had it not worked out the way he had hoped? Was it because he had ignored the signs, distracted by the noise of life, never fully understanding the magnitude of their connection? Or had something else intervened, something beyond their control, that kept them from exploring what could have been? The psychic's words seemed to suggest that there was a higher force at play, something that had been guiding him all along. The connection with this person wasn't just a coincidence, it was part of a greater plan, something that was meant to unfold in its own time, no matter how long it took. The psychic spoke of the moments when things feel destined, when two souls are drawn together with such force that it feels almost impossible to ignore. And that, he realized, was what he had been feeling all along. Even when he tried to move on, even when he tried to forget, something kept pulling him back. Something kept drawing his attention to this person. Something made him question whether this was truly the end or simply a pause in an ongoing story. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had been so focused on the idea of closure that he had overlooked the possibility of continuation. He had convinced himself that it was over, that the chapters of their lives had been written and sealed away forever. But the truth was that it had never truly been over. It had merely been postponed, suspended in time, waiting for the right moment to emerge again. The psychic's message had shattered his perception of what he thought he knew about relationships. She had opened his eyes to the possibility that love, or the bond they shared, wasn't just something you experience once and then move on from. It was something that could be revisited, reignited, and explored again, but only if you were willing to face it head on. And that it wasn't the connection itself, it was the idea of confronting the past, opening old wounds, and facing the vulnerability that came with it. He had spent so long protecting himself, building walls to keep the pain out, that the thought of tearing them down seemed terrifying. But as much as he was afraid of what might come next, he knew deep down that this wasn't something he could run from forever. The signs were too clear. The psychic had spoken of how sometimes, when the time is right, two people are brought back together, not because they're meant to relive the past, but because they're meant to create something new. This wasn't about repeating old patterns or making the same mistakes. It was about understanding the connection on a deeper level, about learning from what had happened, and about opening the door to new possibilities. As he sat with these thoughts, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace slowly washing over him. It wasn't about knowing exactly what would happen next. It wasn't about controlling the outcome or forcing things to unfold according to his timeline. It was about surrendering to the flow of life, about trusting that the universe had a plan that was greater than anything he could have imagined. And in that surrender, he began to feel the weight of the signs that had been given to him, the cosmic nudge that had been there all along, waiting for him to see it. The psychic had opened his eyes to a truth he had been too afraid to acknowledge. The connection was real, the bond was strong, and the time to move forward had arrived. All that was left to do was trust in the process and let the journey unfold, no matter how uncertain it seemed.